In this lesson, we're going to add a camera and animate our light to create a time-lapse effect from day to night while this man drinks. So the first thing you want to do is move your viewport around and get it up roughly where you want the camera frame. So I kind of want a frame like this. And then down here in the sequencer taskbar, you can see this camera icon. If you hover over it, it says it creates a new camera and sets it to the current camera track. So we're going to click that one. And that's exactly what it does. Note that the camera is created in the position that the viewport was in, which is very handy. So I'm just going to quickly move out a bit and get a rough frame in something like this. Now, I want to see more of the room, mostly because A, I don't have an outside shot, but also B, I feel like this shot kind of captures that feeling of being stuck waiting alone. So you'll notice it's quite out of focus, but if I go to the manual focus distance and use the eyedropper, it doesn't quite get in focus. And we can see if I draw the debug plane, it's off over there. Just use this debug plane to get something nice, at least to start with, and we'll turn that off. Now, if you're very perceptive, you might have noticed that the camera that was created has this little orange lightning bolt on it. I'm going to show you what that actually is. If we eject out of the camera and we go out, we can see the camera here. If I select it, it's up in the top right and it has that lightning bolt. If I hover over that, it says spawnable. But if I scrub in my timeline and scrub to outside the frame range, say frame -10, the camera disappears and we get some red errors here. If I scrub back, the camera appears again. Now, it's not like the other shots before when we were using this camera, Camo 1, where it would jump around the scene. This Cine Camera Actor, you'll see I select it, it doesn't show up in the world outliner while I'm outside the range. When I come back in and I select it, it does show up. So what's happening here is this object, the camera, has been created as a spawnable actor. And that means that when this sequence is evaluated, this camera is created, but as soon as it's finished, the camera is destroyed and disappears. Now, why would you want something like this? This is great if you only require an actor for a specific shot. So for example, say we had 10 shots around this room. You could very quickly see how having 10 different cameras around this room with different focal lengths and everything else could get a bit confusing and cluttered. So if you use this workflow, you would only see the camera from the shot you're currently in. Another great use of this is when using lighting. So that backlight and that fill light that we created before only really work from that specific angle we were shooting on. If I jump out to here, you'll see what I mean. You can see here, the fill light is great from that angle, but from this angle, it becomes very much an issue. So that could be a great example of using a spawnable, because once we get to shot 2, we would no longer have to be worrying about this shadow that's in place by this fill light. So a possessable camera is just like what we've been using before, and it's the opposite of a spawnable. So it's one that it always exists in the scene, and then sequencer possesses it when it's evaluated. And then afterwards, it returns it to the scene. Whereas, like we explained, a spawnable is created when the sequencer is evaluated and destroyed when the sequencer is ended. So I actually prefer using a possessable camera. I actually like seeing my cameras pointed around the room and seeing where the coverage is. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to right click on the camera, and up the top here, I'm going to say convert to possessable. And what that does is it gets rid of this lightning bolt, and no matter if I scrub out the range, my camera stays there. So it's now featured in the scene. You can see up the top right here, it even has a name. So let's call this Cam 02. Okay, now that that's a possessable, I'm going to click this pin preview button here so I can always see what's going on. And I'm going to move my lights around. I have the 3 original lights that I really care about. There's the backlight, the fill light, and the key light coming in through the window. So the first one I actually want to look at is that key light. So it's out here. I'm going to select it and I'm going to drag it into our sequencer. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a transform track. So any changes I make to the rotation or location of this light are captured in this track and aren't transferred back to the other shots. Okay, now the effect I want is for the sunlight coming in to be slowly lowering and change into a warm sunset color. So we're going to have to use animation. Now there's many different ways to animate many different things in Unreal. We're just going to use keyframe animation in sequencer on these tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand the transform out. And you can see that we've got the location, rotation, and scale. Now I know I want to change the height of the light as it descends down, and I want to change the rotation of the light. So if you look over on the right here, we've got some keyframe controls. This allows me to create a kind of checkpoint for the current value of these parameters. So I'm going to go to frame 1, and then on the location, I'm going to hit add a new key. And on the rotation, I'm going to hit add a new key. And then I'm going to go all the way to the end. And I'm going to create the end frame. So if we come out here to the outside where we can see our light, we can see our gizmo is in local space. So I'm going to quickly change it to world space so it's easy to just descend the light down. And I'm going to grab that and descend down. Something like there, because I'll also rotate it back up in a second. Now, if I scrub in my timeline, you'll notice the light just jumps back to where it was before. So this is because we need to pull it down and then add the keyframe for the location. And now that new location is saved in this keyframe. So if we now play through, we can see the light slowly descend in the preview. So on top of the light descending, I also want to change the rotation so it's looking at our character. So I'm going to click on our light to activate the viewport again, so that when I click E, it brings up the rotation controls. For this one, I want to actually go back and use the local gizmo, and I'm going to pull this value up. Now I don't want it to be fully hitting his face. I want something a little like this. So it's just getting softer as it maybe goes behind a horizon. Now I need to remember to hit my keyframe. So I'm going to hit that there. And now if we scrub through, you can see it rotates gently as it descends. But I think the most important part of this is actually going to be animating the color. So if we look on the right over here, we have all those values, and we're currently using the temperature. And we're using this temperature, if you remember, to create a kind of bluish light. So I can go in over here to my key light, go down to light component, because I want to affect something that's inside the light component, hit the plus track, and I get all these values. And if I search here, I can just start typing temperature, and then I get the temperature value to come up. And I could start keyframing here, but there's a better way. So if I go over here on the right, I can see all the values the light has, including that original temperature value. If you look over the right side, you'll see add keyframe button. So what this is going to do when I click it, it's going to automatically add that track over here, and it's going to add a keyframe for me. So all I need to do is come back over to here on the right, and then I can come here and change the value a bit. So something just a little warmer, like that. So then I can play through, and the sun gets a little warmer. If you're very observant, you'll notice that the sun kind of starts off moving very slowly, speeds up, and then slows down again. And that's because keyframes have different types, and this keyframe is set to cubic auto, which basically means it's a slow ease out and a slow ease in. But a lot of things in life don't work this way. They move at constant speeds. So we actually want to change this to a different value. To change those, I'm going to have to select the keyframes. I'll select these bottom section first, right click and change it to linear. And linear is going to mean a constant change. So there's going to be no slow to start and no slow to end. It's all going to be the same speed throughout. And then I'm going to select the other keyframes, right click and change them to linear as well. So now when we play, it's moving at a constant speed. So that's how we animate values. I'm just going to tweak a few things now. I think the source radius could be a bit bigger, so we get rid of this harsh shadow. Let's try something like 30. And now I think it's time to change out the lights. So if I come back inside, you'll remember we have the backlight and we have the fill light. Now, while I'm here, I've noticed that we have this little preview error in the shadows, and that's because these two lights haven't been set to movable. So I'm going to select the fill light, change movable, and I'm also going to select the backlight and change it to movable, and that error disappears. I'm then going to select the fill, hold control, and select the backlight. And then I'm going to click and drag them into sequencer. And that's automatically going to create some tracks for me. But one of the most important tracks I want is that transform track. So that when we change the position in this shot, we're not affecting the position in the other shots. So I'm going to select the back and the fill, click plus track and click transform. And that adds a transform track to both of them at the same time. Now, I'm going to grab my backlight, press W. I'm going to change it to world coordinates just so it's a bit easier to move through the scene. I just want this to be a little closer to him. So generally with the backlight, you don't want it to be hitting much more than your main subject. So I'm going to actually point it towards camera. Somewhere around here. And I'm going to bring the intensity down. Now, luckily, it's already added an intensity track, so I don't need to worry about it affecting my other shot. I can just click 4. Let's go down to 2. Stick to 4. So it's not adding a huge amount, but it does just pop him out of the background a little bit. So now for the fill light, I'm going to try something else. I can actually pilot this light. So if I select it, I can right click it and then go to pilot fill. You can also click Control-Shift-P. And this will change it so that I'm looking through the light as if it's a camera. So I'm going to move this over and just watch that preview on the right to see what I'm doing. So I think I'm going to move it somewhere like here. And then I'm going to actually eject at the top left. And I'm going to bring the intensity down a bit more. Okay, that's nice. Now I'd like to animate one more thing in the scene. I'd like to animate the camera to move slowly in to kind of create a more thoughtful shot. So I'm going to select the camera. I'm just going to change the frame in. Now I'm going to do it while not inside the shot. I'm just relying on this preview. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. I like that a bit more. Maybe rotate it a bit towards him and bring it more to the left. Something like this. And then I think this makes a good first frame. So I'm going to open my transform and key the location and rotation. So now that I got that first frame, I'm going to go over here to the end. And I'm going to create my last frame. But before I do, I want to show you how I prefer to animate. So far, we've been moving objects to the position we want them in, or values, and then creating a keyframe. I prefer using this auto key button. So what this does is it's going to automatically create a keyframe as soon as we change a value, as long as there's already a keyframe somewhere in that track, like we've created here. So I'm going to click that, and now you'll see if I move the camera a little bit and then let go, it creates a keyframe down here. So I don't have to worry about cutting back and forth and creating keyframes. I prefer to work this way, but some people prefer to work in a way where they get exactly what they want and then they create a keyframe. So I'm going to move my camera around, try and get a good frame. So I'm going to hit File, Save All, now that I've got that. I feel like, on my key light, I made a change before where I increased the source radius to 30 to create the light, to make the light softer. And I think it works nicely at the end, but at the start, it's now not harsh enough to be daylight. So I'm going to go to the end and do what we did before. I'm going to create a keyframe on the source radius, and then I'm going to come back here and change the value to something like 5. We've created a camera with a camera cuts track. We've learned about spawnables versus possessables. We've overridden our key light and our fill light to accommodate this new shot. And we've learned about animating through keyframes. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at fixing the animation on our character and posing him a bit nicer in frame.